Hello, hola, buenas tardes, buenos días, buenas noches. Welcome to Latinx YC, where we discuss all things related to the U.S. politics from a Latino, Latina, and Latinx perspective. Hello, my name is Clemencia Herrera, and I am the founder of Moira Studio, an advertising agency that works on political and advocacy campaigns that target Latinx.
Hola, Clem. And I am
Hola.
Cecilia del Cid, environmental and social justice practitioner, Latin American, immigrant from Guatemala, community weaver, working in media as well. ¿Cómo están?
And today we have the fabulous Beatriz Abascal back with us.
Bravo.
Thank you for joining us again, putting yourself through all this again.
It's all good. We have some light today, right? We have
We have light.
power.
Today we're not doing Belitas Day.
I thought it was great though.
Yeah, I liked it too. Yeah. So Beatriz is a natural connector, nurturing purpose for the greater good. As a mother of two humans, bisnieta de la Buenaventura, and lifelong social justice advocate, her life experience determines her next step. Her thoughtful know-how and life's work are inclusive and collaborative in nature in the nonprofit sector. Previous and present work includes freelance consulting, thought partnerships development, and communications. Beatriz embodies a personal philosophy of vulnerability, self-reflection, and reciprocal relationships as a good way to begin feeling change. I agree with all of this.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here con ustedes. And bueno, ahí estamos. Let's talk.
Aquí estamos. Yeah. So now that you guys are watching us on YouTube can see all of our beautiful faces this time.
Poderosas.
That's right. So today we're going to be talking about something that is a hard truth to swallow, right? I mean, we talk a lot about a lot of those things, but this is sort of like it touches upon a lot of different aspects of our community and government and just the way that the system works. And this is, it was born, this discussion was born from a study that Beatriz and I worked on some time ago, in which was talking about the challenges that Latinx-led foundations and organizations have to raise funds as opposed to white-led foundations and organizations. Beatriz, you told me some data. Would you mind sharing that with us?
No, not at all. I think just in general, philanthropy is a very is guided sort of by, again, the systems that we live under white supremacy, right? So that the way that philanthropy came about is based on the foundation of this country, right? Because the people that are able to accumulate wealth, if you were to go back into history, that is how it happened, and that's what's reflected in today's data. And so what I know from data that I've studied in the past is 5% of philanthropy goes to communities of color. The other 95% go to, the dominant culture, white-led organizations, and white-governed organizations. Board of directors are made up mostly of white male. That's a true fact. I don't have the exact data, but we can look it up somewhere and do that fact check, and you'll see that it's the case. And many times I think that, for those of us who have chosen development, I think for me, it was because I wanted to do better and I wanted to try to get resources to where they were needed. And it was back then, I'm a product of Generation X, not to time myself, but I I fell
The
into.
best
So
one.
am I.
The best one. Like the best generation.
Okay. I think that, I think that I was definitely influenced by my mother and father, I have to say, who worked to try to do better for a lot of folks around them. And I think I was definitely influenced by doing better, however that was, whatever that choice was. And so falling into development at a time where it wasn't sort of part of a subject that you could study, where it was something like if you cared for a community, whereas today and at my last sort of traditional development role in an organization, people that I worked with had studied how to do development and fundraising at school, which to me was seemed very wow, imagine that is also being capitalized on. And so something that was sort of nurtured, that I felt was a nurturing quality, has now turned into another business, right? And so it's always been that, but I think the fact that it fell into the hands of the institutions to profit from it as a career is also just another example of the systems controlling and conquering and exploiting situations.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, all right, let's just kind of unpack this, right? 5%. 5%. There's nothing.
5% of total
There's
philanthropy, exactly, goes to white-serving institutions, white-led, white advised, the boards.
Yeah.
Again, how do we
95% goes to the white organizations, 5% goes to the ones led by people of color.
Everyone else in that 5%. Think about that. Right?
Yeah.
Who's the largest growing population? Let's just, maybe we should unpack that. You guys have that data, right?
Yeah,
So,
we're gonna be 25% of the population.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
So,
but at the same time, all right. So let's unpack it. Go
Okay.
for it, Ceci.
So I was just gonna say that actually, so some of the information I found by the Latino Community Foundation said that nationally only 1.1 of philanthropic dollars are invested in Latino-led organizations, despite the fact that Latinos are about 18% of the nation. And 40% of California.
Those numbers are even worse.
So, and I'm just saying, and these numbers might be a little if it's saying that 18%, and we know that we're about going to be into the 20%, and but about 18. So that's minimal considering that these are, but it's not surprising.
right.
Yeah, especially because in the last episode that the three of us were together, we talked about how you obviously don't have to have gone through the same thing that the other person has gone through in order to get involved with them. However, I do very strongly feel that communities of color have a much better understanding of how to help communities of color, right? Mm-hmm. In this is what we're gonna be doing with the money, kind of deal. In the money is just not flowing. I mean, this kind of reminds me of when the hurricane in Puerto Rico happened, Maria, right? And there was we were here in Boston, helping certain nonprofits to raise funds so they could send it to Puerto Rico, and the whole discussion was where is the money going? And people felt very strongly about sending the money to local organizations that were Puerto Rican and helped
working on the ground.
And they had been involved in Puerto Rico for a long time. Those were the ones that people are those are the guys that are really going to be spending the money the right way. And so it's sort of the same concept here. It's I strongly feel that communities of color would know where to spend the money correctly when getting some money for certain for communities of color. I don't know how you guys feel about this.
Yeah, I think there's so few people of color in philanthropy because, again, it's about breaking those barriers. And how do we do that? How do we access that? I think the one important thing here when we talked on our last discussion about do you have to be in the struggle? And I think I could say that if you are not in the struggle, you need to be willing to listen. So if you're Latino and have not suffered the same struggles as Latino perhaps that has a darker hue than you, for example, or other people of color, then you need to sit and really listen. And I think that we have to come back to that. It's a very sort of, I don't know, holistic way of thinking about living. And I think, again, I bring back everything to sort of this foundation, which is faulty. We all know it, that we live under. And how do we reimagine, right? How do we reinvent? How do we recreate? And we have to really start by listening. So in the system that we live now, I think that there is a slight shift in philanthropy recognizing what it is based on and the wealth of certain people, and how, it's many times the dominant culture, white families who can start a family foundation and decide where the money goes. And so unless they can identify or, get involved in a community and find an activist, una tia, or somebody to relate to or to listen to, really, because those are the people that are on the front lines, right? Las tias, the aunties, those are the people that are in the front lines doing the type of work that is necessary and important for nothing, sometimes for nothing. And so, I don't know, I think people in philanthropy need to listen. As people in
and there's also
government
just
need to listen.
It's also just the same argument about, why you need diversity in the workplace, right? Because, better decisions are going to be made. If you don't bring diversity into your foundation's board, then, what kind of decisions are you going to be making? Or if you don't bring someone that has had a lived experience into your board, how are you going to make the right decisions?
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I think that when I think of this conversation, it makes me think of kind of two different parallel tracks. One that it is about and I think we mentioned this a little bit, like difference between charity, which is kind of philanthropy, and solidarity. So this idea that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, when I think of philanthropy, it's a way in which people who have accumulated a lot of wealth over generations say, look at me, don't tax me. Trust me that I am going to make the right decisions, and I will redistribute my surplus to all of you equitably and generously. And we ignore all the systemic barriers that are in the philanthropic process, how to put together grants, who gets access to those boards. A lot of those networks are very tied to like a school and other social capital access. You meet them through school. These are your classmates, your colleagues. So you already have to have access to rubbing elbows with the philanthropic class to have access to those funds. If you don't have access to those, you don't do it. And also comes about the communities of color who have more limited resources and who might act from solidarity to contribute, that choose not to contribute because we have not just in this country but through history been assimilated, and this idea that you don't take like why will someone give you something for free, and why would you give your money to someone to give it to someone else? Why haven't they earned it? And this very capitalistic mentality that we've had embedded deep as a society globally, right? And Latinos in particular have been consuming neoliberal economic policy for a long time. Even though we act communally, when it comes to really thinking economically, we tend to be very much like I am gonna go out there and earn the money and replicate these things that are against our own well-being. So I think that there's two tracks that are going. There's like who has access, who chooses to do philanthropy. Just if we tax them all accordingly, there will not be these amounts of wealth out there that can be discharged. They will go into the communal pool and they will cover our basic needs. But instead we have to like compete and tear apart, and I find that it comes from a mentality of scarcity instead of abundance in many cases. But
funny how
just my thoughts.
Funny how like an industry that is really led by like the greater good it sounds just like being a lawyer or like or like being in banking or something like that.
Taxes. Tax them.
I definitely think there's that, and I always will go back to the structures, right? I think that's the problem, is that we're always trying to like get to the next thing instead of sitting in community, instead of sitting in a circle, instead of bringing everyone to the table to get, what is best for your community, what is best for someone else's community. Just because you have an understanding or you're listening as well doesn't mean, it means that we have to learn how to sit in some discomfort, right? And sort of know where in the spectrum of this society that we live in, where our responsibility lays. And so I think remembering that in these conversations, I think that there's a small tilt in philanthropy right now to try and be more inclusive, but I think it's very difficult because, again, it's all based on your proximity to whiteness and white systems that have a tendency to oppress everybody. And so those are just a few of my thoughts, my personal thoughts. I think that one of the things that happens too is like the way that development is given out, or foundations do things, are typically through data, are very data driven. And a lot of times in the Latino-led organizations that me personally have been involved with, it's more about the process. It's more about what's being delivered. It's more qualitative. And sometimes we don't have the resources to have the staff to be, keeping that data. Or it's like, how do we apply for a grant to get somebody to come in and keep our data? So it's all just like, it all just is this illusion of like, oh, well, they don't have the data that we need, so we're not going to fund this program. And yet, here we are, we still do the work somehow. I can't even, like, there's so many aspects of it. I think community organizers and people that work for nonprofits that are not making a lot of money, and their personal lives are being affected because they care about the cause. And so, it's based on all the inequities that we're constantly dealing with to try to sort of level up, so to speak.
It's so funny. We don't even have the right to help our own people.
Exacto.
It's like,
I know.
Yeah,
it's true.
So it's definitely something that we can talk for hours, and I think we'd like to do some more episodes about this, because it's one more barrier that we have, because like some of these organizations are trying to lift people out of poverty. Some of these organizations are helping, immigrants learn to get their footing here in the U.S. Like, or some organizations like Karina's, like La Casita, that they're dealing with immigrants, and it's just like, so they're doing so many good things, and they're being kept from doing the good things because they're not being given the resources. So it's just like it's a very deep running subject that we can talk about. But I also Ceci just touched upon a very important part of this too, which is like, okay, if you have a Latino led organization, wouldn't it be just be natural or make sense just for other Latinos to see, hey, this guy's Latino, he's running a foundation. Why don't I give the money to them? You know, we're Latinos, we're like, you know, el pueblo, la raza, I don't know, all that stuff. Like, let's give it to them. How come that doesn't happen?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one, again, if we go to data, and I don't have the data in front of me, Latinos seem to give less because we make less. The other reason is for the Latinos that, for example, have made it or feel sort of that proximity to the dominant culture, you know, they decide to perhaps give to areas where they feel might be more beneficial on a societal level, if that makes sense.
An example?
I think we don't talk enough about like the class issue in this country. There's a huge disparity, you know, between those at the top and those at the bottom. And I think we don't recognize, you know, that small percentage of Latinx that, let's say, have made it enough to give out money. You know, they decide to choose where it's going, and they decide maybe whoever they feel most acclimated to should get it. And so, I mean, I think that's something, a reflection of our culture as well, like how close we want to be in this proximity of whiteness, as opposed to like really looking at who's doing the work and looking into doing a little bit of research on the Latinx-led organizations that are serving Latinx populations and how to help work towards more equitable situations for those families that are being served, for those elders that are being served, for those youth that need to be served. And I think, you know, I think it's complicated. I think there's no one answer. I think it's very complicated. And it falls under this umbrella of proximity to what we have been conditioned to think is the right thing to be.
Do you think that maybe, and we're always bringing this, like, this topic of like cultural stuff, right? Are we, because I know for a fact, like whenever I go to Colombia, unfortunately, in the city where I was born in Cali, there's so many homeless people. So many. You get approached 20, 30 times a day by someone homeless or you know, by ladies with children and things like that. Is there an exhaustion of like, I don't know, all this, like, I'm tired of listening to this, all this, you know, people with all these challenges. Or it's like, you know, people might be kind of used to it, sitting in their own countries and just be like, yeah, so what? You know, it's like, it's normal. Or I don't know. Is there some of that? I may be wrong, but just wanted to bring that up.
I wanted to speak for myself because I was recently in Guatemala, and I think it's one of the things that I can say I probably has changed. I think for a long time I felt like I was very desensitized, or like it wasn't hidden. Like I feel like unhoused individuals and poor individuals exist in the United States, and like they're just kind of like hidden or like not talked in our country. Sometimes it seems to be very raw, very in your face, and I feel like sometimes in the rush of things you see someone and in the streets, maybe drunk, maybe not, like dirty, whatever, like from the very, very experienced in very precarious situations, and you could step over them. And I think there was this judgment, like, do I give money? Do I contribute? Do if they are gonna use it for? There was a judgment piece, like,
use it for drugs.
What are they gonna use it for? Drugs? And it's like if I give it to the children, they're gonna give it to whoever is their handler. So I think that is part of like this idea that there is hierarchies and there's good people and bad people, and who has the physical characteristics, you know, darker skin or poverty that allow you to be in those buckets. And I think one of the things that I personally have decided is to always have small bills and to just try to distribute whatever I have, and like and that is charity, right? That is not solidarity, and solidarity goes beyond that. But charity is the kind of a very small very small moments, but I want to just call attention to my personal experience as really thinking through my own biases and really thinking and questioning my own judgment on other people's lived experiences from which I have zero context and background, and I am assigning value by saying, if I give someone who is asking me for money to have a meal, and sometimes people be like, just buy them a meal, and I'm like, yes, and sometimes that could put a child in danger, because if they really have a person that is trafficking them or that is handling them, and what they need to do is come up with a quota, I'll just give them money. So I just stopped trying to figure out what are they going to do? Like, begin to trust that poor individual, people who live in poverty, which the solution is to eliminate poverty, is like, they get to make the same decisions of how they spend their money as rich people get to make decisions of how to spend their money. But we don't. We judge them. If they get money, they should cover their bills first. Why would they have something that brings them pleasure or gives them a little bit of get their nails done? We judge that all the time because we feel like their necessities should be covered first, and taking care of you personally, bringing yourself a little bit of joy and respite is also important. But we don't judge how rich people decide to go to Mars instead of like using that wealth to solve I don't know, drinking water problems.
But do you think do you think that the lack of trust has permeated onto like the rest of it's like, oh, these guys are Latinos and they're
I think it's the result of the structural oppression,
an organization, and they must be corrupt.
It could be, but
I can't trust these guys because like, is there like a cultural thing that we do not trust each other?
Interesante. I think that very well might be the case. I think, especially for maybe folks that are coming over as immigrants for the first time and fleeing due to political reasons, right? I think that definitely, I can speak for myself, have experienced sort of that in dialogue with other Latinos, of that distrust. But I think, again, I think we need to remember on a larger spectrum, we need to not only by example live in sort of this radical sense of, let's just allow people to live on their own terms, right? So if Ceci decides that she's going to give this person $10 every time she sees them, then let them do whatever they want with those funds. It's just like going back to in philanthropy. Why can't there be more support for Latinx nonprofits or other nonprofits led by people of color, indigenous people, and Black people that is just for general operating funds? Why does it always have to be such a specific thing that you need to give like the most minuscule reporting on, which can also be like insanity, right?
Control,
control, and it's that control, the exploitation, and then you become conditioned when you're in those development roles. Okay, nope, they're not going to accept this as the report. You have to like somehow reword this, right? Reword this to the proximity of whiteness. Again, it's all of that, and I think those are definitely things that I can speak for myself, being Latina, working in nonprofits, trying to raise money from white philanthropists, white-led, and I've had what I feel has been a solid experience. The only thing that I feel like I was never able to tap into was to try to be in those spaces of philanthropy to give out money, because I could not break that. For some reason, because I'm a little bit of a the rebel, or I'm a little bit of like the fire starter, or let's try to do things differently. And I think my peers, other Latino peers, might also have some fear about losing sort of their place in this society. And so I think once we can sort of radically reflect on ourselves, be vulnerable with ourselves and with others, and realize that, again, I think there's enough for everybody. How do we get there? I don't know, unless we all come together and sit down, whether that's in like a community format or or figuring out ways to get information from the people that are going through it, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Beatriz, you just mentioned something and it made me think of a reason, like in Guatemala, there is a lot of people who maybe about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of non-profit organizations like ONGs started coming up to Latin America. And it became that everyone wanted to be connected to these ONGs because they had foreign funds, right? They pay salaries. And then what is the ONG doing? And then there was a big corruption case in Guatemala in which the vice president is called La Linea. It caused it caused the resignation of the president and the vice president. They're in jail. But the vice president...
Oh, the country?
The country. And these Otto Perez Molina and his vice president, which was a woman, Roxana Valdetti, and the scam was that if you had an ONG, you have to give them 10%. So I think there's big information in our heads of how the governments work and how the non-for-profit works, in which people are always thinking are these funds really getting to the people that I want them to? And just hearing you talking about how the funds are controlled or how this reporting is done made me rethink of that process. And I think that really seeds that distrust, because this is a big case that it happened in 2015, and it leads to this other non-profit industrial complex, right? There is a whole term for it in academia that talks about this maintenance of the systems, and then the funds get this bottlenecking, which at the end begins to trickle down to yes, we do want to have funds so the organization can run and pay their staffs living wages. Yeah. And then we also want them to go and do excellent work because they deserve it. They don't need to be burnt out.
Yeah.
And how do we create that distinction?
I've also heard in the news of white-led organizations that have gotten in trouble for corruption.
Of course.
It's industry wide,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So why is it that they're not distrusted?
Because they're white.
Yeah. So
it's white supremacy.
They're closer to the powers that be, ¿verdad? So they're closer to the people that hold the power.
Also, they are outliers.
Exactly.
If they are corrupted, they're just, that's not the norm. That's not how los blanquitos operate.
Right.
Yeah.
We, however,
it's a big bias there.
Right.
It's a big bias there but it's, I think we've talked about many topics, and this keeps coming up, our bashing our own cultures, saying that we are the ones that are corrupt, that we are the ones that are, that we can't be trusted, that we are the ones that are a mess. First, but it not only it creates this horrible distrust of each other, but second, we start believing it.
But Oplemencia, that has been sort of how we've been conditioned, I think, right?
Yes.
I want to just ask one question to both of you, and especially because Ceci just reminded me of something, but also in the rhetoric that you had, the narrative that you were describing about, isn't it true that there was a time where there would be, ¿cómo se dice? Missionaries or nonprofit groups that would go to sort of say, have the cultural experience, ¿verdad? And
like a savior, like a white savior type.
Yeah, you said it. And so I think definitely Latinos may have been conditioned to believe that, what did they come here for? Like, to extract, right? To take, to learn from our culture, but yet not give credit or not recognize or not cite those experiences. And so I think definitely Latinos that have the capacity to give, which is probably at a lesser fraction, because they say that there's an actual data point which says if you can give 5% of what you earn, then you can be considered a philanthropist. Now, I don't know about either of you, pero yo no puedo dar 5% de lo que yo gano. Yeah. I may, like, I don't do the math personally, because we give in so many ways, and that's another part of the philanthropic piece that like we may not have time to touch on, but the people that make up those boards, there's all of these little loopholes. Like sometimes like you can't be on a board unless you can give at a certain level, right? And so your time, your energy, like the things that you can give, you can only be at certain types of boards. Again, it's all set up that way.
So many boards that require you to pay at least this much money.
A membership fee.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
A membership fee to work. You know what I'm saying?
And it's
or what we consider work.
Free work. Free work.
That's right. Free labor. That's right.
But there has to be an exchange. People would not pay to go into those boards unless it was a benefit to them.
Well, usually the people that work in those boards are wealthy retired people because they have the time and the money.
Yeah, but that means that their experiences are lacking and you have an homogeneity of very specific experiences.
But
right?
I have to say, for somebody who works with currently, and for the last, this will be my third year of working strictly with Latinx groups, those boards are diverse. Of course, many of those boards don't have sort of that I'd have to look at that. I feel like it might be a good balanced mix. I'd have to actually look at each organization, but I do feel like there's not that dollar figure attached to the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And I think that was something that in work that I've done in the recent past, that we were trying to diversify boards in that way, but recognize that people cannot give that 5-figure, 6-figure gift.
Right.
But they give so much more in emotional energy, and dedication and really just passion. And so how do we balance that out for people to understand that is equally valuable, So
and for the people listening out there, I think it goes back to the conclusion that we had the last time that we were together talking. It comes about that passion, motivation, and the drive. Those are way stronger feelings than distrust and and all of that. And then when you start digging deep, because of course there's your big organizations that everybody knows about. But then if you start digging deep into the smaller organizations that are really involved in boots on the ground kind of stuff, see if you connect with them. See, those organizations are very accessible. I'm sure you can get an appointment with the CEO of the organization and talk to them and see if you connect with them. Yeah. You can also see all of their, you can see their reports. They have to report, it's their public reports. You can see how what their finances work, and then see if you connect with them. It's all about, if you see that passion and that drive that they're inside you, you can connect to them. Maybe the trust can start, the lines of trust can start to get connected, because there's got to be small ways in which we start trusting each other, stop bashing each other, stop bashing our culture, and just kind of start connecting with each other and trusting ourselves and trusting each other and helping each other. And that's how I think we start building there.
Yeah. And I would say also not to underestimate the value of the small donations. If what you can do is $1, $2, $5 donation, send that $1, $3, $5 donations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm all about it. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
That crowdfunding and those types of platforms have been just an amazing thought. Whoever came up with these things, I feel recognize that $1 makes a difference. You know what I mean?
That's how political campaigns get funded. Exactly. By $5. If 1 million people gives $5, guess how much that is?
Right. And listen,
$5 million. Los
cafecitos on the East Coast cuestan más que $1, no? When we go out, think about that for a minute, But I think, I definitely think, getting back to what you were saying about people giving their time and energy. Like if you sit in a place where you feel like you can create access for any organization that is led by a person of color that might not get the same resources as, let's just say, some of the larger organizations that may be led by people of color in your region, I think reach out to them and start a conversation, because I think that's what happens. Again, it's about listening because no sabemos todos. We don't know everything. And so it's good to listen to other people's stories. And I think that that's a very foundational guiding principle in what I believe in. Like, really start listening to what people have to say. Get off your phone, put the phone down, listen, I think have the conversations. So
very wise words by Beatriz. And with that, we leave you. Thank you so much, Beatriz.
Thank you, Beatriz.
Amazing. You're so awesome. Thank you for all you do. And thank you, Ceci, again.
No, thank you for joining us, Beatriz.
I feel like we're getting this year on a really good start. And thanks you so much, everyone, for listening to and putting up with us all this time. If you want to see our beautiful Latina faces, please go to YouTube at LatinXYZ Pod. And please email me, clem@latinxyzpod.com. If you want to tell me how you feel. Hey, I take all the comments. I see your comments in YouTube. Some people hate this stuff. Some people love it. I take all of them. Thank you.
Clem listens.
Give me all of them.
That's right.
Yes. Exactly. Yes, I'm listening to you. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.